and welcome back to OCD Coded. I'm Erin Brown, licensed marriage and family therapist and mental health counselor. I also have OCD myself, and I didn't realize it for a really long time. It's a really hard one to identify, and my hope is to help explain to you and help, share my point of view of how I learned to overcome or turn my OCD into a superpower and help you learn how to do the same. Um, and you can visit my website for more information at ocdcoded.learnworlds.com. And my hope is to really help you feel more understood, to understand yourself better, to understand others better, and to be able to translate, your voice into the world. And so today we're going to be talking about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is such a thing that really becomes, you know, uh, it's like such an overwhelming feeling. And I too have been saying processing disorder, and I'm trying to practice the saying neurodivergence, and it's not a disorder. It's, one of all of those things with OCD and ADD and all the different things are different forms of neurodivergence, which how we can learn to start to understand the ways different people learn to see the world, and then how to be able to understand that, and like also that we look at the world differently, but that with this kind of dysphoria, it's just this despair that happens with rejection. And as I talk about, being a social species, it's understandable that that like the fear of loss of attachment, the fear of abandonment and rejection would feel equal to death. And some of the research from the Trauma Research Foundation that they presented at that conference this year was about that, about how the attachment and the fear of attachment in infants is scarier than the threat of a predator. And so just how much that attachment really does play into our fears in the world, and how that fear of it not being there can be so difficult. And so one of the ways I wanted to explore today was how it presented in my own life. And, it's hard to share some of these things, but my goal is to help other people not feel as alone with it, and to start to begin to come up with ways of how you can, work with that, and especially work with that kind of part of you. And so, with my experience of it, is middle school is such a hard time. And actually, middle school is a really common time when OCD comes out, and that 8 to 12 range is when the prefrontal cortex is coming online more. And so when we're able to have abstract thought, when we're able to realize that other people see us maybe a different way than we experience ourselves on the inside. And, and that it's really, it becomes so difficult. That's when we understand our social status a little more, and to be able to, and really start worrying about how other people perceive us. And so in my middle school days, it was very much a starting to ask everybody compulsively. Now I know I didn't realize it at the time, but that, compulsively ask people if they were mad at me. And not anyone, but my friends in particular. It was any thought or expression or view of it was very much, like, oh my gosh, are you mad at me? Um, like just, and it was that fear, it was that rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It was um, that intense fear of this rejection, and then being able to overanalyzing every thought and not being able to conceptualize how they could be seeing this world differently than me. To the point where I did it so much that I showed up at school one day and they were not talking to me, and wouldn't tell me why, and found out later. I mean, and I don't blame them with this. I mean, that must have been really exhausting for them, because that's one of the such a big compulsion that can be hard to identify, is seeking assurance. So I'm seeking assurance that I'm okay by asking them if they're mad at me, and seeking assurance that our relationship is okay by asking if they're mad at me. But that by continuing to ask and need assurance, it's actually putting more tension on that relationship, and it becomes so difficult to navigate that. And with all of it, it's trying to find this way that we can honor that part of us that feels that fear, and that something's not right feeling. That's such a big part of OCD, and that like there's just something's not right. And it's so hard to identify or put words to it. And that can be such a thing with OCD, is that fear of the unknown. And so if there's a feeling that's unknown inside, then it becomes one of the obsessions. And it's so hard to understand how a feeling might affect me can affect someone else so differently. And it's so interesting to think about in that way of like, we all, just the same as we all agree that a certain color is green, or a certain wavelength or however we wanted to conceptualize it, but that really we don't know if the green that I see or the green that you see is looks the same. We can't actually see it from each other's point of view, but we kind of agree that this thing that we're both looking at is this one thing. And it's the same for anxiety or depression or OCD kind of thing where we know what it is, but it presents so differently for everybody else based on all of their experiences and also all the, genetics or predispositions in those kind of ways. And becomes, how do we start to have these conversations and build this kind of shared reality that honors that I see the world one way, that you see the world another way, and that's both of those can be okay. And then how do we come together and then decide how to collaborate with that and to do that? And what do we do when we disagree? And this goes to many levels of things that can be so difficult. And that's where I do think of OCD as a superpower. And along with the rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, there's a tendency to feel feelings very deeply. And that can come, the cost of that is that I feel sadness very deeply, but I also feel love very deeply. And, so I think of it with that like how much I feel the fear, like how deep or strong the fear feels to me. Also doesn't mean like that the fear is that true or real, and distinguishing the difference between what's my intuition versus what's the OCD becomes such a topic where that it's going to be like, is this my fear or is it my intuition? And I sometimes think of that with like the more urgent it feels, then that's one way to know that it's OCD and not my intuition. But that because my intuition tends to be more like it feels low and slow, like this is what it is, instead of OCD and the calculations like da 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 da, or if this and this and that and that and da da da, what about this? But just realizing that how big my fear feels doesn't mean the thing is actually that scary. Whatever I'm afraid of doesn't mean is that scary just because I feel the fear so deeply. And so being able to look at our feelings differently and recognize and honor like, wow, I'm feeling something really strongly and I can honor that. That doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong. That doesn't mean I need to feel the feeling all the way or feel the feeling a certain way. I can just honor that, wow, this is a big feeling washing over me. And, and then decide what I want to do from there. I don't have to, a thing I try and tell myself is that the feeling is real, but it doesn't make it true, that I can feel this thing, but that, especially with shame, like, I can feel shame, but that doesn't mean I have something to be shameful about. That, that shame pops up for so many things, and guilt too, but that if I know what I feel guilty and shameful about are things that I've done, but that like there are also times when the emotion feels bigger than what is the situation. And it's just one of those first steps. It's starting to practice that where we're starting to distinguish the difference between the two and being able to say that, it feels really big. These emotions feel really big, and that can be a strength in that how much I feel things, but that to also remember the ways that that's tricky and how to cope with those big feelings without being overwhelmed by them. One concept I really liked that I wanted to go over at the end here was about that the idea that let me see if I can get this right, but that like there's a bear and a wolf, and the bear is like fear and anger, and that the bear grows as we get bigger, like that as we're children the bear is smaller, but the bear grows as we get bigger, and that fear and that anger grows. And so but that there's the wolf, and the wolf is like love and like confidence and all of those kind of things and happiness, and that the wolf is always stronger than the bear, but it doesn't get bigger. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it too. The idea that feelings can feel really big, but that doesn't mean they're stronger than other feelings that don't feel as big, but they're stronger. So a different way of kind of thinking about emotions and trying to interact with them differently. And that's our whole goal, is how to practice responding differently to some of these things instead of the automatic thoughts or the intrusive thoughts, the rumination, the repetitive thoughts. And so that's one of the tools we're going to practice for this time, is how do we start to look at our emotions, as a strength, as a message to us, and that I can feel something feeling deeply, and that doesn't mean like the feeling is real but not true, that like, and that just because I am incredibly sad, that's all that means. There's not another story on top of that too, of like, I'm going to be sad forever. We're just trying to gently identify all those thoughts that come in and notice them and not judge ourselves for having them. So I hope that helps. And please let me know how you experience your emotions and any thoughts or questions you have. And until next time, I hope you have a great one. Bye.